Good morning, Montreal, and welcome back. As our parents start to age, there are certainly some difficult conversations that we have to have with our parents, whether we want to or not. And we are joined in studio this morning by Stephanie Erickson. She is a social worker with Erickson Resource Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about why you think it's so important to help people understand how to go about having these conversations.
Well, as a social worker, I'm often involved with families when they're in crisis. And what I find is that without those proactive conversations, the best decisions are not often made. And families feel really remorseful after the fact because they wish they would have had these discussions prior. So I'm very passionate about proactive conversations.
Right, and prior to your parents getting into a situation, a health situation, where maybe they can't even articulate what it is that they want, right? It might be too late at a certain point.
Absolutely. You should have the discussions when you're healthy. Right now you should be having those discussions so that when the time comes, you're ready to act. It's the same thing kind of with a fire drill. We prepare and practice, so in the time of crisis, we know exactly what to do and where to go.
So you've created sort of a user-friendly template to help people with the different steps involved. Tell us about that.
That's right. I use the term CARE, the acronym CARE, C-A-R-E. And it's a 4-step process to initiate conversations with aging relatives.
Right. And it all begins with the C, stands for connection.
That's right, connection. So you're going to use this as an opportunity to learn about your aging relatives and how their relationships are with their own aging relatives. It will give you some insight into people's core values about relationships and family.
Maybe if you ask your mom, an example might be, Mom, what was it like with your mom growing up? And what did you like about your relationship with your mom? Those kinds of questions.
Exactly, and you can even ask things such as, what were your relationships like in school? How did your parents support you in school? How did your parents support you with your extracurricular activities? So again, you're getting to know how they were as a family.
Right, and maybe how they might want to be treated down the line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
The A stands for aging.
That's right. So this is really about getting to know how your aging relatives experience their own role as caregiving for their aging relatives. So this gives you insight into what caregiving was like for them and some information about maybe things that you should be doing differently or the same.
What would be examples of questions you could ask them?
Mom, were your parents ever sick? How were you called upon to help them or not help them? Did they share discussions about financial issues and health-related issues with you, or were things kept private?
Interesting questions. I mean, we never think about having these kinds of conversations with our parents, but you might uncover some really interesting information in the process, right?
Yeah, you will, and believe me, hindsight is not always beneficial in these sorts of crisis situations.
The R stands for recent event.
That's right. So you're going to use the recent event as an opportunity to generate a discussion about an age-related event. So something that you read in the newspaper, maybe a segment, for example, this, or even a movie that you see, and you're going to start asking questions about this recent event to understand how your aging relative perceived the event.
Use that as sort of the excuse to bring up the conversation.
Exactly, and it's disconnected from us. It's not as personal, so sometimes it's easier to use something like that.
Right. What questions might you ask them?
Well, for example, let's say there was a story in the newspaper about care in the hospital system. So you might say to your relative, what was your reaction to that story? How do you think things were managed? How would you have done things differently?
Right. And finally, the E stands for every detail.
That's right. So this is when it gets much more difficult for families because it becomes very personal. Because now you're going to ask specific questions about specific situations so you can understand how your aging relative would like you to care and support them should they need it in the future.
So for instance, let's say grandma is living independently, but we're starting to notice that she's not strong enough to be able to take her own shower. She's not strong enough to go out and do her own groceries. We're thinking about putting her in a home where she can be better cared for. How do you have that conversation?
Well, it's interesting you're bringing this up, Camille, because you're talking about a situation now that's already happening versus maybe having a bit of information proactively.
Right.
But I think once someone's in that situation, I always recommend that you talk to the person who's experiencing the problem, so in this situation, grandma, and find out what it is does she want. I think often families with the best of intentions start to kind of bulldoze and make decisions on their own instead of including the person, and that can can create a lot of family tension.
What are other issues that you see as a social worker that emerge and become problematic? It would be a different situation if people had just talked about it earlier.
Family dynamics and sibling relationships. Often, I want one thing from my mom and my sister wants something else, and now there's a crisis and a decision has to be made in the moment. Mom never told us what to do, and now we're arguing about it.
How about the wills as well?
Absolutely. Well, and this leads us to the planning of it. If you can get those legal documents in place, it really improves family relationships and also the care and support for the senior, because they're actually dictating what it is that they want. So they want a living will and a last will and testament and powers of attorneys and other documents that you can consult an attorney about.
Very interesting stuff. Stephanie Erickson is a social worker and director with Erickson Resource Group. If people want more information, where can they go?
You can come to my website, www.ericksonresource.com.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Camille.
We've got more coming up in health news. BPA-free plastic may be just as toxic as regular plastic. We have a report.